Hello, it's Matt Chapman, and I'm here with my very close friend, Bentley de Beyer, Global Head of Human Capital for Goldman Sachs in New York. Hi, Bentley.
Hi, Matt. It's great to see you in these unprecedented times.
You started this role only in January 2020, just before, obviously, the world descended into chaos.
So yeah, 1st of February was my official start date with Goldman Sachs. And it's been what I would say is one of the most challenging years, but one of the best years strangely, to step into this seat. And for all of the HR practitioners who will tune in and listen to us today, I think, and beyond, I think you really understand an organization when it's under pressure. You really understand the quality of leadership. You really understand the values of a place when there's a huge amount of volatility or external shocks or challenges. And so the privilege of being in the seat is being able to see how our leaders have shown up, being able to be there for our people, and do that in really creative and inventive ways. If you had told me that 6 weeks into the job, I'd lead a 4,000 person guided meditation with Deepak Chopra for investment bankers and asset managers across our firm, I would have told you, you're kidding me. But these are the sorts of things where we've had to be, as practitioners, hugely inventive, but also understand the need for resilience. And I think mental health, resilience, developing grit are some of the greatest things we'll learn from the pandemic. Equally, I think there'll be fallout from that in our communities and other things that we have to keep an eye on, because I think it is something that's a very real and recurring theme that I'm seeing as I speak to other CHROs, as I speak to our people as well.
It's a huge theme, and I think how we tap that going forward is really going to be the key. So you talked about the tempo of just the market's client expectations, even the expectations we're putting on ourselves ramping up. But what are your thoughts around how you build resilience in a culture and how you keep people energized after such a tough year?
I think some of it's about going back to some of the strengths of the firm and understanding what that is in our people. So we have an environment, we've got a lot of high achieving talent. So people who have always done well at whatever they've turned their mind to. That was actually a consideration as we thought about boundary setting. Because one of the things that is challenging for high achieving talent and high performing talent is boundary setting in these environments. And so a lot of our focus, Matt, was around how do you help the talent steer and say it's okay to decompress, say it's okay to manage your day very differently. Understand that face time is no longer as important as it once was. And what really matters is how you're finding balance and how you're getting the job done, but in your own way. And I think the other dimension of it was thinking about how you stay connected with your people. I think there's actually been a great flattening of hierarchies with the pandemic. I think that the technology is part of it, but I think that this has been a great humbling moment for everyone around the world. And I think that we've had to center ourselves around keeping human connection and breaking down borders and silos. And so I think that's a strange dividend in a very, very challenging and just excruciatingly difficult time for everyone. That, I think our folks in Asia have seen a lot of our senior leaders with a higher level of frequency than they would have before. And you've got people jumping in. It's like coming into your living room that you would never have expected as well. I think it's also humanized our firm a lot more as well. I mean, it's, dogs barking, kids jumping into the frame, a whole range of different, lawnmowers working behind the window. There's a range of different things that have just humanized everyone across the firm. And I think, some of that comes out and we're much more empathetic, I think, as well. And I think if that's the greatest gift the pandemic can give us, it's empathetic leadership. And we're seeing how a lack of empathetic leadership can be challenging in political forums and in different settings around the world. So I think it's a really big moment for leaders to come back with being okay with being vulnerable, thinking about how the power of empathetic leadership can really open up potential and recontract with your people. So it's a really interesting moment, Matt. And I'm very stimulated by the challenge of it, but at the same time, recognizing that these are the sorts of pathways and sort of well-trodden paths that many leaders haven't trodden down before. And so, coaching, the role that we play as senior coaches is huge. To be great sounding boards, to be able to help validate courses of action where there are no playbooks. So I think part of that creates new muscles, and new muscle is resilience for me.
So as a global HR leader, how do you synthesize the right sources to be able to provide that support? Because I see this as a really absorptive period now where we need to have our eyes on the right wisdom to enrich what we know and also what we're seeing around us.
That's a big question, Matt. I think you have to diagnose the patient well first. I think I was approached externally and internally 4 weeks into the role saying, what's the future of work? And my answer, frankly, was, I don't know. We're going to learn a lot from this particular point in time. And we're going to take the best of what we can from this, because it's been such a challenging time for the world, for communities, for our employees, and for everyone navigating this. So I stand back and say to myself, based on an accurate diagnosis, who are the world's best thinkers in the space? So Deepak Chopra, Suzanne Anderson in emotional agility, Dr. Ginsburg at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and thinking about the people as a whole self coming to work. I know that's a bit of a cliched phrase now, but it's important, particularly now. So we've done a lot of work on the fact that most of the stresses for our people were around childcare, around an unwell family member or a challenge that they're experiencing, responsibilities that have been thrust upon them. And so we've focused there in a way that the firm hasn't really focused before. We've had all of the usual offerings, but this was much more proactive. And we were astounded by the level of take up and traction with it. And I call this the great recontracting moment. This is where, talent will really understand, I think back to the early part of our conversation, the caliber of the place that they work with. And so it really is a recontracting moment either way, right? So it's an incredibly important time for HR practitioners in particular to navigate this well. And it's very tightly bound and tightly wound too, Matt, as we know, in all periods of great stress in the world. And so I think you have to stand back and say to yourself, are we showing up well every day for our people? That can change every day based on the nature of what we're managing, whether it's the race crisis, which has been ongoing for decades and has just appeared in different formats this year, whether it's the pandemic itself, or all the other dimensions of what we're trying to lead through.
I see it as a really important time to focus. And before, we've taken in so much stimuli, but actually now is the time to focus on quality conversations, quality material, and just get the best result. The final question I want to ask you is, you've obviously had a very global career, and so you're very attuned to a global landscape, but how has this pandemic changed the way an organization like Goldman Sachs leverages the whole global community, and how are you leveraging that at the moment as well?
I think we've got many conflicting forces we're dealing with, Matt. One, the great flattening of the hierarchy, and we were a flat organization to begin with. So I think if it's flatter, it's now pancake flat. And I think what we've done is we know, and we have hyper connectivity with our colleagues in Hong Kong, Bengaluru, in London, in Warsaw, through the nature of the rolling nature of the crisis. So it's brought us all together, and we stay in this daily sort of rhythm and high levels of connectivity, which I think is very powerful, because you're running and anticipating things that could impact our clients, could impact our people in different ways. And because of the nature of the world, that bears down on us very, very clearly. I also think there's a real risk that you see nationalism emerging in the world. That can also happen in big companies if you're not careful. When you're in crisis, you go to familiarity, you go to the places you know, you go to a safer place rather than trying to push out and trying to reach out. And you have to, for many leaders, it's about feeling and doing something very, very counter-cyclical or counterintuitive, which is looking outwards, not inwards, and ensuring that you're really doubling down your connectivity. You have to be much more planful and choiceful about, as you say, using your quality time in a way that that pushes you out, doesn't push you inward and starts you navel gazing. Because that if you start navel gazing, it's like walking along. It's like the corporate equivalent of walking along with your iPhone on the sidewalk. You're going to run into something. So you really have to look up. And our CEO David Solomon talks about looking up all the time. And I think it's a really important moment for us to do that. But it's very counterintuitive. You really do want to nest. You want to bring in and create this psychological safety in an environment where there are people around you who might be a little bit more like you. And actually, it's really important. This is a huge moment for inclusion. This is a huge moment to actually double down and recontract on diversity. And I think this is where the broader recontracting is going to show up for companies or not.
Bentley, thank you very much for this 10 minutes. Much appreciated.
Always a pleasure, Matt.